Well, as I was preparing for this talk, I began to think, when did I first discover you? And I honestly don't know when it was. It's been a number of years, probably while studying apologetics at Biola. That's where, a lot of people come across your material. But I found your pathway to Christianity really unique and quite special. So for our listeners today who may not know who you are, do you want to share how you went from an atheist to a convinced and committed follower of Christ?
Well, I was in Los Angeles County and grew up here, born here, raised here, and worked here. And I was working as a police officer, eventually became a detective, and then started working unsolved murders. I was assigned to robbery homicide for a number of years, and we always had extra murders that had been unsolved from years before. A couple of them were my dad's. My dad was here from about 1961 to about 1988. So I thought, I'm going to open up on his old cases and try to solve it. I was not a Christian growing up. My dad's not a Christian, no Christians in our family. But my wife was very interested in taking our kids to church when we finally had kids. And I was somebody like my dad who would have said, I'll go if you want to go. I don't think it's true. But it doesn't need to be true in order to be useful. So I was more than happy to jump into something that might be useful and at the same time would please my wife to go to church. So I'll go. And so I got in church and heard the pastor describe Jesus in a very kind of, in a very selfish way. I was interested in Jesus because he described Jesus as the smartest man who ever lived. So I was interested in the wisdom of the ancient sage that's known as Jesus, right? I mean, I bought the Bible. I bought one just so I could look at those red letters. And I was, I thought all of the accounts, I was surprised, first of all, that it was more than just red letters, that there was this expectation that the writers of the Gospels had that I would somehow believe that the sequence of events they're describing is actually true. This is much of what happens in eyewitness accounts. And so I ended up just getting involved in the Gospels and testing them as eyewitness accounts because that's really all I knew to do. And I actually thought that every Christian did that. I thought that everyone who reads this Bible does the same thing, right? Like they test it to see if it's true. And that was my journey toward even considering that the gospel started with testing the gospel accounts. And so that's really my pathway to becoming a Christian.
Yeah, and I know that you found this out as well, but it's kind of amazing how many people really do kind of approach Christianity as a blind faith. They really don't take the time to investigate the truth claims. And I don't know if it's because they're afraid of what they might find, or they're just fine, going on this, blind faith alone. I'm not sure what it is, but I know you found it to be incredibly beneficial to pursue truth, as I have. And what I found really cool is you took your expertise, you took your experience and your research, and you actually put it into a book called Cold Case Christianity. Great book, great resource. But I'm just curious, why did you write this book? And for our listeners, what is this book all about?
Well, I was teaching the material to students. And I had, I got saved, and years later I went to seminary, got a degree in theology. Then I started pastoring, usually the same age as my kids. My kids, as they grew up, I was pastoring in ministries that were age appropriate for my kids, so we could be together as a family. And so by the time my kids were in high school, I was the high school pastor. And I was teaching this material to high schoolers because I saw that so many of them, even then, were walking away from their faith. Now, my kids now are 31 to 23. So they're a little bit older, but I can see that they were, a lot of their friends were no longer Christians after the first year in college. And to be honest, they stopped being Christians long before that. But by the time they went to college, they had the liberty to just stop claiming they were Christians. So I was really determined to take an evidential approach with my high schoolers. And I shifted toward teaching what we call apologetics, which is just really to make the case to defend, I hate to even use the word defend, to make the case affirmatively for why Christianity is evidentially true. And I started doing that, and I would take my students on trips to Berkeley and to Salt Lake City to stretch them theologically or to stretch them from an apologetics perspective. UC Berkeley in our state is a pretty hostile or, either apathetic or hostile to the Christian worldview. So it's a great place to take your students to see if they understand how to navigate those issues and how to have conversations. And I was on one of those trips with a friend of mine, Sean McDowell, who is Josh McDowell's son. And he had a high school class that I was training on the way up, and he saw me training his class, and he said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book about this?" And I thought, I just don't have time. I mean, I've also had, I never stopped working as a cold case detective. So I had a bunch of cases in trial. But my wife encouraged me, if Sean's going to help you find a publisher, why don't we just at least write a chapter or two? And that's how Cold Case got written to begin with. It was really because of Sean.
So give us kind of just an overview of the book and what exactly this book is about.
Well, I try to do in this book, like all my books, is number one, teach you the skill set, kind of the reasoning set, the evidential evaluation approach we take, so that you can also know how detectives work. And then I take those, and I usually will tell those in the context of a detective story, and then I'll turn the corner and show you how you could apply that to an examination of any event in the past, whether it's a murder from 30 years ago, or whether it's the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus from 2,000 years ago. And that's what I try to do. I try to give you 10 skills in that book that we use as detectives that we're then going to apply in the second half of the book to test the eyewitness accounts in the Gospels. Are they eyewitness accounts? If they are, they seem to be slightly different. Why would that be? And does that make them unreliable? Well, how would we even test any account from the past, whether it's an eyewitness that comes into trial tomorrow, or whether it's a document, something that happened 40 years ago, or whether it's a manuscript from 2,000 years ago? There is a process by which we test and measure and evaluate eyewitnesses. It's actually in one of these books back here behind me on the shelves from the California jury instructions. I just took the California jury instructions for the testing of eyewitnesses, and I applied that process to the Gospels. This is what I had to do, what I did when I was a new investigator of the Gospels. And the book just kind of retraces my steps as it's basically 4 large areas in which we test an eyewitness, and we do that in the second half of the book.